Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. Each week, Matt, Curt, Jerry, and the occasional special guest explore how the trauma-informed paradigm challenges traditional beliefs and approaches concerning a wide variety of areas. This podcast addresses psychological trauma in an educational manner and is not designed to replace mental health treatment. If anything in this podcast makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, please talk to a mental health professional.
Welcome back, friends, to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. This is episode 16, and calling this our first annual search for the future of the trauma-informed paradigm. As we enter 2018 and leave behind 2017, we thought it would just be fun to sort of throw out lessons that we've learned personally and professionally from our work with the trauma-informed paradigm, trauma-informed schools, organizations, leaderships. Just some of the lessons that we have learned, and then take some time to kind of look forward. As I was telling Curt and Jerry as we were prepping for the episode, this is kind of a whole episode on bright, shiny objects, about what we've experienced and where we see things or even hope things are going to be going in the future. So should be a fun episode and hopefully a great way to launch the new year, which hopefully everybody had a great holiday, got some time off, took care of yourself, and are ready to go back to doing the important work that we do. So the first question, and Curt, I'll start with you on this one. When you look back at 2017, what are some of your big takeaways, things you've learned, experiences you have as it relates to the trauma-informed paradigm?
Two come to mind. One is a group of clinicians that I worked with in the early part of 2017, and how the concepts that we talked about started with reading a book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and how that really galvanized a team with shared mental models and shared language. And what that did for team integration and what that did for a team approach to organizing clinical work was incredibly rewarding for me and really, really valuable for that team. I'm still in contact with them and connected with them. And those discussions have lasted throughout this entire year and have been carried forward, even though I'm not working with them directly anymore. Awesome. And with a second group who are working with very, very young children, like birth to 3, how much there is a need for continual education about the trauma-informed movement. I remember asking this group one time what they knew about trauma and what they knew about trauma-informed care, or the ACEs study. And this group of people is actually treating mostly kids and families who are served under Medicaid in Colorado. And probably as a group, kind of like when we looked at the ACEs study that was done in Iowa with people who experience HIV, it saw that ACEs scores are incredibly high.
Yeah.
Same thing with that population. And this entire group of clinicians, well-meaning, wonderful, really, really great and incredibly dedicated people, said, we don't treat trauma. We treat young children, and that we don't treat trauma. So it made me think, on one side, how incredibly powerful it is for galvanizing a group and having the right kind of shared language as we understand the people that we treat, and also how much need there is for further education about it. Those are probably two of my biggest takeaways from this year.
Very cool. I share that experience many times over with the organizations I work with, and it's just so cool to help bring that shared language and understanding and how transformative it can be. Jerry, what about you? What are some of your takeaways from the last year?
As I reflect on that, it's more the flip side of that same coin, is going into organizations and having them report that they're trauma informed. And so when you start to, dig down deeper into trauma, what is trauma informed? The question is, when are you trauma informed and when are you not? where are you trauma informed and where are you not? And that I think that has been a really important process in thinking about it. It's almost as if somehow you go to a training, you go through this checklist, and then you're trauma informed, as opposed to it's a developmental process. And that as organizations become stressed, it's a natural biological directive really to become much more reactive and much more focused on threat, as opposed to being consciously kind of making decisions and being sensitive and attuned to clients. And I think kind of giving people permission to in some ways accept that it's a process, not an event, has been a really important part of the learning during the last year. The other thing I think has been really important is that I think as I've gone through talking to people, and I've been doing this now for 20-something years, there's very few organizations that don't know about the ACEs studies, or don't know about the amygdala, or don't know about, right? And so some of these things are getting into our general discussion in ways. And I think really the next step is creating a deeper understanding and learning about how does that impact people in their day-to-day activities and decision-making, social interactions, leadership of organizations. So I think we've been really successful in getting this first level of kind of trauma-informed. Now it's about being trauma-responsive and trauma-sensitive as a next step of development.
And can you define the difference in your mind between those terms?
For me, one is more of a cognitive understanding. They have a knowledge base.
Yeah.
So they know about the ACEs. They know something about the way the brain develops. They could use the language. They know something about, stress and toxic stress and kind of tolerable stress and healthy stress. So they know about serve and return concepts.
Yeah.
So a lot of the concepts that we've really worked really hard to get out, we've been successful. And now it's about in supervision, in case consultation, and kind of really looking about how to best apply those things to individual cases, but also in terms of policy and procedures, in terms of decision making, in terms of team meetings.
Yeah.
Really beginning to look at how to make those actually a really part of the culture, and not just having the knowledge, but it's really about how we do business going forward.
Great. So trauma-informed, having the knowledge, trauma-sensitive, really reflecting and working to incorporate that knowledge.
Really,
to say into the DNA of the organization.
I want to change it from trauma-sensitive because that gets confused with the treatment approach, but more trauma-responsive.
Yeah. Great. Cool. Well, and I share sort of both those experiences with you. I think my big takeaway is kind of related. I got two that are very related. Is one, I've been astounded a few times how quickly this is catching on in places. As Jerry was kind of saying, a lot of times, and as Curt said as well, I was been in the role sort of over the last about 7 or 8 years of introducing concepts to people, only 2 or 3 people in a room raising their hands when I say, has anybody heard about the ACE study? And those hands more and more in every room around the country go up, which I think is a great thing. So where I thought we were, I always like to say eventually, because this is based on the brain and really hard science, our communities, our policymakers will have this understanding. But I saw that being 15, 20 years out just a few years ago. And just the proliferation of this into the knowledge base, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I still want to do everything in my power to speed it up because people need it. But just how it's spread, like a virus around the country. And as, one of the people that get on airplanes and spread the positive virus around as I catch all the other viruses on the airplane, it's been really cool to see. And as part of that, one of the things that I really have become ultra aware of is the movement in education right now, where it was, mentioned here and there a few years back, and, some of the more progressive or the school districts looking for answers, working with some really, were challenged and families that were challenged socioeconomically and otherwise, it's really getting into the mainstream and having access. First of all, it seemed like a few years back, I was just training the social workers and the mental health folks in schools. I've had rooms full of principals. I've had rooms full of all the teachers and the specialty staff and the teaching assistants. And so seeing that jump out of the mental health and education and social work into the larger education arena has been really cool as well. And our next episode, we're going to talk about the Trauma Sensitive School Conference coming up with two of the organizers of that. So we'll hit that topic in detail coming forward. So next question, Curt, let's start back with you. If you could dream, what would be one kind of realistic hope you would have happen in next year, 2018, or this year, 2018, if you could have one hope for this year that you think would make a significant change, what would that be?
Man, it really depends on what level you want to even ask.
Dream, my friend. You've got the magic wand in your hand. I know for a behavioralist that's got to be hard, but
well, I mean, mentioning that my theoretical training and background and training is in behavior analysis. I'll go with that one, right? And I've said this a few times that I think that the ability for the trauma-informed world and the world of behavioral science to start to be able to talk to each other and work together in a way is something I would really hope for. And I have it on my calendar, actually. There's a conference that's happening in San Diego for an entire day, which is around acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's one of the sides of behavioral science where essentially inside the skin symptoms are given a lot of attention and are a part of the therapeutic process. I'm planning to go to this because one of the symposia at this conference is about the issue of scope of practice and how does a behavioral science where in many people's eyes, we're not trained as quote unquote clinicians. And we don't have the understanding of other psychological processes to be involved. I'm really interested in hearing that talk and hearing people who have I've kind of developed a niche that I have a foot in both of those worlds. And I would hope that those two could blend a little bit better over the next year. Certainly, I'll do my best to keep doing that.
I was going to say we have a leader of that movement right here on the podcast with us. So know you're doing a lot of cool work in that arena. Jared, if I gave you the magic wand, my friends, what would be sort of your one semi-realistic wish for 2018?
It's first wish is that I shoot a 76 on the golf course.
I said realistic, Jared.
All right. So getting back to what we're doing here. So I guess my wish would be, as the country is struggling with passing certain bills that are protecting children, this gap between what we know about science and early childhood and exposure to adversity and how it's driving healthcare and how it's driving some of our other social issues that are there, is my wish would be that we align what we know with the policies that the country is engaged in. And so that we can really invest in early childhood, supporting families, supporting children, programs that in-home programs that support early parents to make sure those first few years are to do it. Organizing community resources so that the communities are engaged with children and families that they're in. And so we really get back to having some of the science drive some of the decisions, because right now there's really a gap between what we know and what we do. So if I had a magic wand, I would try to close that gap in 2018 and going forward.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would extend it a little as well to the adults too. I mean, I think policy on all levels. I just got on the Twitter chat yesterday for the Homeless Memorial Day here in Denver, Colorado. In 2017, 232 people experiencing homelessness passed away. So you're really looking at that. And I guess my wish would really kind of go right in hand with yours, Jerry, around the policy issue is, and I thought we were almost here, and maybe I'm just not aware of it, but, have sort of maybe a governor, a celebrity, somebody sort of in the larger who has more Twitter followers than I do.
You're not a celebrity, Matt? Come on.
I got the 300 Twitter followers, and I'm pretty happy with that at this point.
That's 300 more than I have.
Well, yeah.
I don't even know how to use Twitter.
Don't worry about it, Jerry. That's a different podcast. Yes. but I just, somebody that would take this more into the mainstream consciousness. And I feel like you said, Jerry, a lot of people, I think just in mainstream, not just in the helping professions, could tell you what the amygdala does in a rough way, or the prefrontal cortex, or even now trauma is an issue. But just to put that in there in a way that sort of stays with people who may not get exposed to this in any other way. And, to bring that into the policy conversation would be, if I had one wish, celebrity with more than 300 Twitter followers. And my handle's at mattsmumbling.com, because if you want to push me up to 400, I'd be happy. But, that would just come in as an advocate on that level. Because I know there's amazing advocacy going on all across the country. As we had our podcast with Barbara a few weeks back, and just really looking at that from that larger consciousness level, I think would be great. So that's my one list. So George Clooney, if you're listening, we'd love to have you. So we'd probably do 2 episodes with you, George. So just that, or if Hickenlooper, or get a mayor or a governor on here. Hopefully somebody will take this flag and carry it forward for us. So
you talk to your 300 people.
I know. I look for the celebrities. I do. One of my favorite singers who nobody else really knows, because he also probably has 200 Twitter followers, followed me the other day, and I was really pumped. So that was my 15 minutes probably. So it's done. So. All right. Enough about my Twitter account. Let's get to the dark side of this, since I just saw Star Wars last week. Great movie, by the way, on the Matt scale at least. What don't you want to happen? What's a fear that you have when you sort of look into the future, and we're in kind of, as Jerry said, policy-wise, and in kind of a scary time in many ways. What is one thing you're sort of worried might happen that you hope with all your might doesn't happen? So, Curt, I'll start again with you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take that one to something that I know actually will happen, and that makes me worry a lot.
Yeah.
And that is, you say we have the sphere of everything we know is this big, right?
Yeah.
And if we put all of our knowledge into that, it can keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if everything outside of that circle is everything that we don't know, then by reason, if we expand our knowledge, we actually get in bigger contact with what we don't know. And I think that that is a great thing and also poses a risk for us all. That, and this has happened to me, I mean, this is part of my own process, as I learn more and more about how the brain works, how the body works, how people work, how organizations work, I find out more and more and more about what I don't know. And it makes me at times a little overwhelmed. And I've gone through this process with teams and with individuals a lot, that it can start to magnify differences more than integrate things. And I worry about that a lot, where the uncertainty of finding out all the things that we don't know, where we're like, wow, I was doing that wrong all this time, and now I have this new information. And that's, then I can certainly can make me magnify some differences and create differences in places where they may or may not exist. And I know that happens every moment of every single day, and it happens to me, and it happens to most teams that I become involved with, and most clinicians that I talk to. And so I worry about that a lot for myself, and for a trauma-informed movement, or any kind of movement that I think has some momentum. As we increase knowledge about it, we actually get more contact with what we don't know.
Yeah.
And I hope that we as a group can kind of help people from getting unstuck from that. I take that from, that I think our first episode, Jerry said one of the things he loved about this work was helping people to get unstuck. And I haven't forgotten that. So I hope in that sense, I know it will happen, and I hope that we're all mindful of it and can be able to help people and help ourselves in that way.
Yeah, I think I share that anxiety with you. And again, it's amazing what we don't know. And what, I think the other thing too is, what do we need to know at this point? Because there is so many facets. I'm just reading about all the parts of the amygdala. It's like, really? Now I have to learn about a whole new brain. The amygdala is got all these parts, and it's like, man, it just keeps really blowing my mind. And again, showing what we don't know. And hopefully we can really, and I think what I hope this podcast does is help people see what are the important things. We can let Jerry read about all the double-blind studies, and he can tell us all those answers. But really, what are those important things to know, so we have that shared language? But that's not an easy thing, as you gave voice to in a very succinct way. Jerry, what about you, my friend? What's sort of on your worry radar?
I think that when we understand trauma, and we understand how it organizes our experience, the risk right now of something happening in our country, an attack or something that happens in our country, and the vulnerability we are to kind of get organized in a negative way, that is a really scary thing. That I think we're at a crossroads where, in years past, trauma and all this knowledge in 1789, when Piaget and Freud and everybody was doing it, and something happened and people kind of forgot about those things.
Yeah.
And I think there's always the risk when you think about Judith Herman's work, and she lays out the history about how this information comes up and people get really aware and people sensitive. And then there's some social political thing that happens that kind of gets people to go away. So I'm really excited about the spread of this, as we talked about just a moment ago, but I'm really very anxious about how people being frightened by some event may push people in a very different direction. And so I sit on that wheel of being both incredibly optimistic, but understanding history and the historical perspective, having some level of anxiety at this moment as well.
Yeah. And mine, I think, really relates to that as well. And it's, really, if I were to hammer it down into one thing that's really concrete that I'm actively worried about and trying to advocate in whatever power I have to do is the repealing of the Affordable Care Act, which kind of happened with the passing of this tax bill. Not fully, but as I travel around the country, you see all these new clinics being built and people getting health care that never got health care before. And it was really powerful. 2 states I went to, Louisiana and Arkansas, right after, and then Kentucky too. I hit those states pretty early on in their adoption. Kentucky and Arkansas were pretty early on, and then Louisiana about a year or so ago, a year and a half ago now. And in each of those states, they had documented lives saved, that people that had potentially fatal diseases went in for their first medical appointment in their life, and they were diagnosed right on the edge of being treatable. And, with that, I feel like a lot of the folks I work with have been able to make such progress in recent years. And it seems like all the funding to support that process moving forward, including having the capacity to think about the issues we talk about on this podcast and best practices and trauma-informed care, that all that sort of is in pretty severe jeopardy at this point. So, we'll just keep having Barb on to tell us what to advocate for and how to do it. So, but again, hopefully if we have to fight to keep our gains, that's okay focus. Hopefully this knowledge can continue to spread. That's my optimistic end to that. So one of my favorite questions to help me fill
We almost went to the dark side. We'll get back to the podcast.
yeah, let's get back to the line. Let's get nerdy for a second here, actually.
Don't want to go there too long.
Yeah, don't go there too long. So let's really get nerdy here with some of the books that we've read this year. Now, they don't have to necessarily have come out in 2017, but what are some 1 or 2, 3, 4 of your sort of ones that you just kind of have stuck with you, so to speak?
I have 2 off the top of my head, and one is a reread and one is a new read. My reread was Quiet Leadership by David Rock.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful book. I'm worth a second time through, and I'm already planning my 3rd time through to learn the model better and have it more solidified in my own cognition. More of a, I think I'm with that model. I'm probably at unconscious incompetence at this point. I haven't become consciously competent at it yet. But that was one of my favorites of this year. My second, which was a new read, was Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky. I really enjoyed that book. And it was, you read one of his this year too, I think.
Yes.
And boy, what a lot of information crammed into a book. Loved it, really enjoyed it. I actually listened to it on audiobook and had a really enjoyable several weeks driving to work listening to that book. Really enjoyed that read a lot. Those were 2 of my favorites this year that were books that I read. And I have a few articles that I had read that I really enjoyed. I from a business perspective, I read Harvard Business Review a lot and love so many of the things that they write are short, concise, easy to kind of like disseminate to others. So it's really well done. I love this one article called Teaching Smart People How to Learn. It was one that I really enjoyed this year a lot. That one that's coming out called The Neuroscience of Trust, which I think would be a really awesome one to read. I'm excited to get through that one. I've just read the kind of the intro to it at this point. I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but those are a couple more that are kind of on my radar.
Very cool. And I always like to throw in the words David Rocker mentioned. I also love to throw in Your Brain at Work as well, which is one of my, I read it several years ago, but was just almost a Bible of self-care in a lot of ways for me. And it helped me increase my efficiency at work dramatically. So David Rocker, huge fan. So Jerry, what about you?
I've read a couple of, I read a lot of books, but one that stands out for me was The Developmental Science of Early Childhood by Claudia Gould. Really kind of looking at following up on Daniel Stern's work on infant-child interactional, and really looking at the way in which adults' representations, the way they think about the world, gets behaviorally communicated to children, right? It's like, how does what's in my head and my experience happen is it impacts this interactional process. And so really trying to begin to look at from an early childhood, but thinking about that happens in all of our relationships, right? Is that what we say is one thing and how we interact with each other is a totally different piece. And the other one that I read as I went back is Dr. Perry rewrote his, had a second edition of the Boy That, so I reread it for him, kind of looking at that with some additions in it. And then looking at a book, and I can't remember the author off the head, it was the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And really looking at what talked about in there is when we make a commitment is not what we say, but actually what we do. And there's always a gap between what we say and what we're actually doing. His example in there, and I think his name was Chapman, I'll have to look it up. But his example was a lot of us say we want to lose weight, but we don't lose weight. And so the real commitment is not to lose weight. Real commitment is to be comfortable and meet our needs, right? And so as we talk about this trauma-informed movement, really thinking about what are those commitments that we have to actually engage in terms of leadership, in terms of interactions with our clients, in terms of interactions with our coworkers that are in a way not what we say we're doing, but actually what we do.
Yeah.
And we're committed to kind of making healthier, more restorative, reparative relationships in every interaction that we have. So I think those challenged both me thinking about my own, what I'm teaching and how is there integrity between what I say and what I do? And also looking at how this impacts therapy in the interactional process.
Very cool. And I got that up on Amazon. It looks, and I'm terrible with names, Jim Deathmere, I'm probably killing it, Diana Chapman, and
yes, I knew there was a Chapman in there.
Kaylee Kickump. So there, I butchered all three of those names. If you're not called Jerry or Curt,
can you say it again?
I don't do last names, so I'm the worst at it, but I'll put that on my reading list, Jerry. That does look really good.
Okay.
So I had a couple, it was a slow reading year for me because I found that when I was writing a book, I couldn't really read a book about what I was writing about. So it was a little slower than normal, but I have a few. One, and Dr. Gabriel Maté is one of my favorite authors and thinkers around everything that he thinks about, including trauma. And he came out with When the Body Says No, exploring the stress-disease connection, that he brings in all this evidence of how the types of stress and trauma we experience manifest as different diseases in our body. And I never really seen it approached from that sort of detailed perspective. Whereas a type of abuse or a certain type of a shame response would manifest as a different medical issue. And it was one of those that just kind of blew my mind, and I just recommended it to every physician that I could, because it's not an easy read. It's very detailed, very medical, but very powerful at the same time. His book, still one of my favorites, The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, would be, if you're going to start with Gabriel Maté, go there. The other ones that I really liked, one is Childhood Disrupted by Donna Jackson Noweskia. Sorry, Donna, if you're listening. Read that book. If you're spending time listening to our podcast, Childhood Disrupted is, I think it's an updated great trauma book. As these come out, Herman's, you mentioned, Jerry, Maté's, there's been these really powerful books, and this one was right on that list, and being new, it would be a great accessible read on trauma. The other two I'm currently digging through at a deeper level, and they're just blowing my mind. One is Curt mentioned the Sapolsky. I'm probably killing that too.
Sapolsky.
Yes, thank you. The Behave book, and I'm taking notes on it now, and it's one of those I'm just taking notes on basically every word in the book. But what he does is he looks at a behavior from like a millisecond and then scoots back over time, and really powerful, relates to trauma. And the other one from, I can pronounce this name, Lisa Barrett, on how emotions are made. This one is challenging. She kind of goes after some of my sacred cows as far as some of the models Daniel Siegel uses and Daniel Goleman uses, and brings in some new science that really challenges some of the brain models that we've used in the past, and does so in a really powerful way. And I see Daniel Siegel's work as somewhat sacred. So I was like, oh my gosh, she talked bad about it. She didn't talk bad about it. Gave him all the respect he deserved, but really challenged some of that sort of ingrained thinking that we've had. So those are the four on my list. All right. Here's the next question. We've got two more to go through. Individually, in your own professional sort of work, how do you plan to further the movement this year in your own work? So what is sort of one thing, project, kind of area of focus that you see is going to be important for yourself going forward into the next 2018? Curt, take us away.
At least two, maybe three. I could probably go into four while I'm talking. Others will pop into my head. Couple of projects. One would be bringing a trauma-informed parenting lens to foster care. Is a big project that I'm working on that I'm really hopeful for and excited about. Certainly being able to bring a trauma-informed perspective to early intervention in Colorado. Not that it's not there, but certainly my role there has changed. And so being able to do that and help clinicians who are working with children and families who are in early intervention, how to understand the ACEs and how to even screen for the ACEs to help expand their understanding of what may be happening in a family and what may have happened to a family. Those are a couple of real big ones of mine. A couple other ones are certainly working on trauma-informed leadership in a couple of different organizations, helping clinicians to really understand that in their sphere they are a leader, and they have a very important role with children and with families and adults or teenagers or whoever they're treating. They are in a very important position and can lead people through very important processes to very important outcomes. And so teaching about leadership in that sense is something I'm working on. So those are kind of three that I have right now that I'm working on, and a couple of more on the back burner as well. So I'm hopeful for a really exciting year.
Great. Keep you busy at least. So Jerry, what about you, my friend? When you look at 2018, what's some of the things you get excited about with your own work?
So the first thing I get excited is about hearing the both of you talk about this stuff and books you're reading and what you're doing is really getting young professionals, supporting them in helping them to move things forward, is thinking about the next generation of people that are going to kind of carry this baton forward. The other thing is I'm working with the Office of Behavioral Health here in the state of Colorado. We have been involved in creating a theory of change for schools, for trauma-informed schools and trauma-informed systems here in Colorado. And so really looking at helping the state of Colorado move that forward. And implementing that. I also have through the System of Care grant through the Office of Behavioral Health, a consulting group that is going to be helping schools and child welfare and what we kind of think about wraparound facilitators around the state of Colorado to be looking at cases and situations through trauma-informed lenses. So thinking about systems changes is really what I'm going to be focusing on this next year, and that what I'm hoping is along the way is to pick up some really new, excited individuals and support them in taking up and maybe later on adding them to your, as I move into the, into retirement, is thinking about other people really taking the baton forward and helping children, families, and vulnerable adults really feel supported and getting the kind of services they need.
Great. Yeah, and that theory of change, I mean, I'm really excited for that. I think that could have a huge impact, and again, create a model maybe nationally as well, if we can figure that out. So it's been fun to be part of that group. Mine, two sort of fold at this point. One is I just always love to continue the work. My training schedule's filling up for the spring already, and got some really cool trips scheduled. So always looking forward to that, and always an honor to actually, it's still so humbling that people want to hear what I have to say. So always take an honor in that, and sort of along the lines of Curt, my thinking, I really want to shift my writing at least to trauma-informed leadership, and really start to focus on, I've created online trainings in the past. I've done a lot of trainings on the topic, but really taking a new deep dive, a new look at the research, bringing together what we know about psychology and business, best practices in those areas, and really thinking again about that. How do we create, trauma-informed schools, organizations, systems, communities? Leadership's a part of that. And I think in some ways we're all leaders, but the other thing is, if you're in that structural leadership position, you can be the biggest barrier to change, or you can be a huge advocate for change, and helping people understand the difficulties and some skills to be effective in those roles. And the other thing I'm really excited about, and this is like really short term because I'm hoping mid-January for this. When I wrote the Connecting Paradigms book, I had a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that I love, like the analogies and a lot of the stuff I've used for years in my training, and it just didn't fit in the book. And I tried to force it in 3 or 4 different ways, and my wife and other people that were reading some of the first drafts said, you got a cup analogy, there's something about elephants and riders, I don't know, what's this window of time? And I was just confusing everybody that read it. So I spent the last about 6 months bringing those together and reformatting them into a book I'm talking about trauma and change, that I really hope for people, I mean, a therapist could use it as well, but for people that may not be trained in a trauma-specific treatment, that they could use these analogies to talk to folks about the effects their trauma might be having on them, and structured it in a way, and this is kind of from my past work experiences, it was so hard sometimes to come up with group topics, whether I was in a counseling or a therapeutic role. So really structured ways that could be implemented in that or in individual work as well. So always exciting to get something else out, hopefully a good resource to folks. And I'm itching to get back into the leadership stuff. I'm really excited to do that. And who knows, maybe there'll be a collaborative here of some sort working on that moving forward. So really looking forward to that. So our final question, this throws us out. And so let's take a deep dive. What do you think, if you were to look in the crystal ball 10 years from now, where do you think the trauma-informed movement would be? Where do you think it would be? I'll kind of start out with a question I've been asked a lot to give you guys the time to kind of think around this. And a lot of the questions I get when we talk about the brain is, well, why don't we start putting kids in foster cares, in school? I think I asked Jerry this question 13 years ago, actually. I remember at Denver Children's Home is, we've got this brain functional MRI technology, another brain that we can see the brain operating or take a look at it. When are we going to start to use that in more mental health, educational, substance abuse settings? And you know, so I guess to kind of start the conversation around this question is, as we see the brain in a more and more in-depth way, I kind of wonder, when does it make sense to start to use this technology as a therapeutic tool? And I don't think we're there anywhere close to there cost-wise at this point that it makes any sense. And because we have such kind of a 30,000 foot view, maybe even technology-wise, it doesn't make sense. But if I think about 10 years into the future, and maybe there's something called the connectome out there that we could actually see how the brain operates in a very deep way. I wonder about that. I wonder if the cost goes down enough and the technology improves enough where we may be able to use some of that technology, if nothing else, maybe in a biofeedback way, where people can see in a great detail how their progression in care. So it's almost too materialistic for me to think that way, but at the same time, you know, I kind of think we're in the X-ray stage of things. Is, you know, if your bone, if you kind of see the bone poking out of your skin, the doctor knows it's broken, but the X-ray kind of helps out a little bit. And maybe we'll be there in a couple years where in 10 years, we could be doing some interesting stuff with the brain scan technology. So I just would love to see, because a couple people have asked me that question, what's your thoughts about that? And where else do you think this sucker can go in 10 years?
I think you've got a great point with that. I mean, right now, the ideas of biometrics and wearable technology is getting its way into the medical world. Yeah. And I think it will get into the behavioral health world, and it should get into the behavioral health world. And I think that would be really, really incredible. I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens with artificial intelligence and how that starts to play into the behavioral health world. I may have some ideas about how that'll work, but you know, those can be really controversial because those don't involve human-to-human interactions, and how we use those, I think, will be really interesting. While you were talking, I thought about, and I don't think this is really a new idea, but I think it's still a relevant idea, that as we have to do more with cost control and continue to do more with less, I think we'll continue getting pushed for organizational partnerships between organizations that do certain things well, and to bring all of those together in new and innovative ways to try and do good things for people. And the more that we can cooperate and collaborate, the better experiences we can provide to people who need help, and who may need help in an area that maybe one organization doesn't do well. Another organization does do well. I mean, I see this happening a lot now with the ideas of congregate care and reducing our reliance on congregate care. It's really, you know, getting rid of congregate care hasn't been the answer in a lot of ways, but creating partnerships between congregate care and non-congregate care, and case management or service coordination, those kinds of collaborations and integrations, I think, are going to be even more and more important as time goes on.
Very cool. Jerry, what are your thoughts, my friend?
10 years. Wow. It's probably anything we're thinking will be different in 10 years because we can't even think about, right? Innovation and change and creativity. But I think that 10 years from now, we will have a different way of understanding what is going wrong with people that interferes with their ability to function. Instead of thinking in terms of diagnostic categories based on a list of symptoms, we'll be understanding that there's neural networks that go across these diagnostic categories, and that will have a totally different way of thinking about both physical health and psychological health. That will open up new ways to create interventions. So that I think that the models we've had, kind of thinking about going back to, Freudian psychoanalytic models or behavior models, then cognitive models, then there's a new model that will come up that is in the merge that will help us all to shift the way we approach problems that will allow us to be much more effective and use some of the tools that we have more effectively to help people. I also think that as government begins to struggle financially with other kinds of things, community connections will become more important. That people will seek out certain things in their communities to kind of help them to as opposed to relying on systems to do this. Systems will be more about supporting communities, that our models of building communities will be different. Thinking about communities and how to structure the physical structures, their relation, that architecture will become an important part of mental health and physical health and all those things we're looking at. So I think that as we move to the future, I think Curt kind of alluded to it, there'll be some kind of a merger of things that are doing well. But I think it's even greater than that, is thinking about architecture, thinking about city design, thinking about transportation, thinking about all those things that impact our lives will be much more thought about in terms of creating healthy, physical, healthy places for people to thrive and kind of do it. So I think there's some excitement that we have in the future and challenges that we kind of look at. But, technology allows me, to not only read about psychology, but to read about business, to read about quantum physics, to read about systems theory, is as we move forward, is that some of this knowledge will begin to intermingle, and that we'll be able to sit at a table and really engage in some pretty sophisticated kind of conversations about how to not just kind of cure people who have problems, but create environments that keep people healthy.
Yeah, and I think all those are my hopes as well. And I think that, boy, if we can get, that's where I think we're at such a really key part of this paradigm, to get the information out there now. And I think 10 years from now, even if it's not necessarily in the trauma-informed package, Jerry, you've talked about this in the past to me a lot, that may not be what's in our policymakers' heads or our teachers' heads, but an understanding of the biology of stress in our brain and psychology. I think I see it as I travel, especially in areas really hit hard by the opiate epidemic. There's communities that are dying, like just, Appalachia and Pennsylvania and the Virginias, you see some of these numbers, and there's whole communities that, we've got to figure this out and understand what's behind it if we're going to solve it. And so I'm hoping, as part of this process of, okay, there's these epidemics, and in other places of the country, it's other substances or mental health issues and everything, that will, since we understand where a lot of this comes from in a different way, that our paradigm will take a big shift in 10 years. And we'll ask those questions when we're building buildings, when we're building schools. My wife just moved into a new school, and it's just, going from her 1950s school to this brand new one, it looks like somebody took up all the kids on a spaceship and dropped them off on a different planet. And so there's just so much cool stuff happening that if everybody listening to hear, if we can continue our advocacy and spreading the word, again, I always think about those people that change will come too late for. And so I see it as a real motivation for all my work is, boy, if we can get this message out there far and wide enough, hopefully we don't lose another generation to addiction or poverty, and we can really start to address some of these issues. So, which is a really cool thing to be a part of. And I kind of want to end on that note with folks is thank you. This is, you know, we're on episode 16 at this point. And so thanks for joining us for the first 16. I'm really excited. If I look in 1 year ahead, what will be the New Year's 2019 Trauma Informed Lens podcast look like? Will Curt have a beard? Will Jerry has hit his goal on the golf course? So we'll revisit this one and see if we've actually hit some of those benchmarks for ourselves. But as always, Happy New Year to everybody. You can find our show notes, links, videos, all on traumainformedlens.org, as well as all of our past episodes as well. So, Jerry, Curt, thank you guys very much. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year.
And we'll see you all next week. We got a really great episode next week with some national experts on trauma-sensitive schools. So please make sure you join us for that and learn why this is such a key area of thinking for all three of us. So we'll see you all next week. Take care of yourselves, and Happy New Year from the Trauma Informed Lens gang. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks to everybody listening.